January 1st, 2011, President Obama stated that a transition process in Egypt, quote, should result in a government that's not only grounded in democratic principles, but is also responsive to the aspirations of the Egyptian people, end quote. If 1 year ago you had asked U.S. policymakers what kind of developments they were concerned about in Egypt, they might have expressed doubts as to how much real power the military would be willing to give up. They might have indicated concern about a rush to hold parliamentary elections, a rush that would benefit a well-organized radical Islamic group like the Muslim Brotherhood, while leaving fledgling secular political parties out in the cold. And they might have said that they were worried that the new Egyptian government would follow in the Mubarak government's footsteps by continuing to restrict the activities of domestic and foreign non-governmental organizations engaged in democracy promotion. Unfortunately, all of these fears have been realized, and then some. In particular, the Egyptian government's treatment of pro-democracy NGOs is in direct contradiction with the democratic principles and is not responsive to the aspirations of the Egyptian people. In fact, the Egyptian government's politically motivated treatment of these NGOs is actually worse than the way they were treated by the Mubarak regime. The government has raided and closed their offices, seized their assets and funds, launched a media campaign against them, prohibited their employees from leaving the country, and has announced that it intends to prosecute 43 of their employees, including 16 Americans and 14 Egyptians. Egypt's Minister for International Cooperation, a holdover from the Mubarak era, is reportedly behind many of these actions and stated that the government's announcement of charges against the NGO employees makes clear, quote, the government's seriousness about discovering some of these groups' plans to destabilize Egypt, end quote. But the activity of these NGOs have nothing to do with destabilizing Egypt and everything to do with offering the Egyptian people assistance in their pursuit of freedom, in pursuit of democratic governance that will uphold and protect their fundamental human rights and liberties. Hostility to democracy and human rights is why the Mubarak regime restricted the operations of these NGOs and refused to process their applications for registration. It is the same totalitarian mindset that is driving the current Egyptian government to carry out this crackdown. However, this is not the only issue of concern. Egyptian religious minorities are facing persecution by the very extremists that not only have assumed positions of power in the parliament, but are now questioning the utility of the Egypt-Israel peace treaty. These are very concerning trends. If the United States continues to provide assistance to Egypt, even as our own citizens are persecuted and our taxpayer dollars are unjustly seized, then we will be sending a number of unacceptable messages. That we will acquiesce in and bankroll Egypt's assault on pro-democracy forces and the isolation of secular sectors, that we will acquiesce in and bankroll other unacceptable behavior by the Egyptian government, including backsliding on the peace treaty with Israel, that we will stand idly by as other foreign governments that are U.S. aid recipients act in blatant contravention of U.S. values, of democratic standards, and of their international obligations. Both the executive branch and Congress must make clear that to resolve this situation, the Egyptian government must immediately return all assets and funds that were seized in the raids of the NGOs and allow them to reopen their offices and resume their work. It must also end the politically motivated investigations and prosecutions of these NGOs and end the media campaign against them. The Egyptian government must also comply with international human rights standards and provide these organizations with freedom of operation throughout the country. The Egyptian government's actions cannot be taken lightly and warrant punitive action against certain Egyptian officials and reconsideration of U.S. assistance to Egypt. For even if this issue were resolved tomorrow, this episode will color the way in which assistance is provided to Egypt. While the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces bears ultimate responsibility for the strain in relations, the Minister of International Cooperation should not be exempt from punitive actions. This is not about sovereignty, but about patronage and corruption. Therefore, no further U.S. assistance should be provided to any ministry that is controlled by the Minister of International Cooperation. I yield back the balance of my time, and it's a delight to yield to my friend, Mr. Berman, for his opening statement.